I think he froze. Kevin Doby. We'll come back to him. Karen Flores.
I'm here.
Sandy Flores.
I'm here.
Jackie Kellogg. Jackie. Devonna McLaughlin.
I'm here.
Sarah Meyer. Moses Milazzo.
I'm here.
Sarah Miles.
Here.
Corey Runge. Jennifer Vargas.
Present.
Haley Zaroya. All right, Kevin Doby.
Present. Present.
Thank you, Kevin. Jackie Kellogg. Jackie, we see you, but we can't hear you. If you can confirm that you are present. And who was it that just came in?
I believe Tyler came in.
Okay, perfect. And then Jackie?
I'm
Jackie
here.
Kellogg.
I'm
Thank
here.
you, Jackie. Sarah Meyer. Sarah
She might
Meyer.
be having some technical difficulties. I've clicked admit on her about 3 times now, so I know she's trying.
Okay. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Adriana. Could I have someone please volunteer to read the land acknowledgement? Okay, no volunteer, then I will read. The Housing Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within our jurisdiction that is not scheduled before the commission today. Due to open meeting laws, the commission may not discuss or act on items presented during this portion of the agenda. To address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Do we have any members of the public or any comments submitted?
Chair, I have not received any emails and I don't see any members of the public present.
Great, thank you, Adriana. We're on item number 5, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the December 4, 2025 meeting?
I'll make that motion. This is
Thank you,
Ivana.
Devonna.
I'll second. This is Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy. All right, we have had a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. The minutes have been approved. We have no action items for item number 6, so we will move on to presentation and discussion items. Item 7A is overview of Housing Solutions 2025 rental attainability report. This is an informational item only, and Devonna McLaughlin will be presenting.
Awesome. Thank you, Moses. Adriana, I know I sent it late, but do you have the presentation?
Hey, Devonna, did you send it today? I don't believe I've seen it, but let me check real quick.
Yeah, about a half hour ago. I sent it via email.
In the meantime, I see that Sarah Meyer has joined us, so can we please add her to the attendance list?
Yeah, we'll make sure that we have that noted in the minutes. Devonna, I'm not seeing.
You want, am I allowed to share my screen? I don't know how that works.
You should be.
Okay, let me check and see how happy everyone is. Can you see my screen by any chance?
We can see your
Yes.
screen. It's not in presentation mode, but
Yeah.
we can see it.
Perfect. Let me get to presentation mode. How do I do that? Slideshow. Here we go.
That's down in the bottom right corner. There's a little, there you go. Oh,
All right.
no, that's your view.
Is it not happy with everything?
We can see it, but it's just smaller than it could be.
Oh, I wonder if I can share a different screen.
Yeah, you'll want to select the other option when you present.
How do I get this to go to here? Maybe, hang on one second. Don't look at my emails real quick. Let me see if I can do it the other way from beginning. No, it did it still in that one.
Devonna, there's a display settings at the top of your screen. See if
Oh.
that'll fix it.
Swap presenter view and slide view. Ah,
Perfect. Thank you.
how's that? Okay. Okay. Phew. Sorry for the craziness. So I am happy to talk with you all today about our rental attainability report. To give a little bit of background on the report itself, Housing Solutions has done a rental attainability report for 10 years now. That's kind of fun and nice to be able to do this, not just snapshot, although every year is a snapshot, but to then be able to look back holistically to see kind of what's changed over time. So we're kind of pulling that data now to see trends over the last decade. But it is our 10th year of doing this. For this year's rental attainability report, we surveyed 55 market rate apartment complexes that represent 9,256 units and 9 income restricted complexes, which represent 822 units. We did the survey between October and mid-November. It takes us a little while to gather everything with multiple phone calls and emails and web searches. I will tell you, this was the first year we had a couple of multifamily properties refuse to give us data. In the past, we've been able to at least work around or get, the city to call and get the information from them. When someone more official calls, sometimes they'll give the information. But this year there were a couple that just refused to give data. So that's unfortunate. But we did the best we could in capturing the data that was available. The reason we started doing this was to try and gather information about what's really happening in Flagstaff when it comes to rents. So a decade ago, we were seeing that rents were increasing at a rapid pace and that the HUD fair market rent data didn't really capture what was happening in Flagstaff. And there's reasons for that. So HUD's fair market rent data is for the metropolitan statistical area, which in our case is all of Coconino County. It also has a different methodology. So it's really looking not quite at averages or mean. It's looking at kind of a different way of doing things. And so we knew the information we were getting from the federal government didn't quite capture what was happening in Flagstaff. And so we wanted to see if we can gather some more accurate and timely data. And so that's how this was born, was really a conversation with the private sector and the public sector to say, how do we get better data for what's happening in Flagstaff? Can we track that over time? Can we just be Flagstaff centric? And can we see kind of how increases in the supply or increases in demand might change rent over time so decision makers can have better information. And so with that being said, the report then, I think you guys have a copy of it or got a copy of it or can get it on our website. It's a 2-page document that looks pretty thanks to our graphic designer and marketing team here at Housing Solutions. What we're trying to do really is condense a lot of data down into digestible bites. And so the first data has to do with actual rents. So what's happening with rents in Flagstaff, once again, in the fall of 2025, and how has that changed from the previous year? And so this year's rental data changes is a mixed bag, and it's actually a lot of good news. We have not seen in this year significant changes year over year or significant increases. We've seen some unit sizes go down a little bit, some unit sizes go up a little bit, but overall there's not, double-digit swings in increases in rent from the previous year. We did see a room in a shared living environment. So this is a lot of your student housing complexes go down 7.7%. And we also saw 3-bedroom units go down 7.2%, which is great data. And then for the studios, 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms, much less significant changes, a little bit up, a little bit down, but overall, not the crazy double-digit increases that we've seen over the past decade. This is also reflected in what we've seen in fair market rents. So I just told you that HUD's fair market rents aren't always accurate, but there's a lot of programs that use fair market rents in order to set rental limits, including, the Housing Authority with Section 8 vouchers, or friends at like Catholic Charities with rapid rehousing assistance. And so fair market rent does factor into our world, and we do live by it in a lot of cases. And so we also, on the rental attainability report, show you what happened to that change from the year over year. And it's the same mixed bag. So we saw, rent for a studio go up 2.1% for fair market rent, but rent for a 2-bedroom go down 1.08%. So little tweaks and changes that are pretty consistent with what we've seen in our data collection for the actual rental averages that you can see here.
Ivana, before you go to
ahead.
the next slide, could I ask a quick question? I think you might have mentioned it, but I missed it. Are these just in real dollars, or are they in inflation adjusted dollars?
We did not adjust for inflation.
Thank you.
So these are actual increases from year to year, not an inflation adjustment. And if anyone has any other questions, just interrupt me because I can't see you guys with my screen slideshow up as it is. So I apologize for that, but interrupt me anytime. So that was the good news, right? Things didn't go up significantly year over year. The not so great news is that they didn't go down significantly, which would have impacted positively on affordability. So we're still seeing that rent is not that affordable. So for a 2-bedroom apartment, which, you can do this math for any unit size, but we picked 2-bedroom, a Flagstaff renter has to earn $78,000 a year to afford that average 2-bedroom apartment. And there's a lot of asterisks on this slide for a reason, right? Because there's mathing going on behind the scenes. So how do we define affordability? And for our purposes in this calculation, we use 30% of gross monthly income for what is needed. If you're paying 30% of your gross monthly income, so you're not housing cost burden, then you need to make $78,200 a year. And then the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment based on our survey results was $1,955. So that's kind of the math behind the scenes that, 78,000 is not certainly entry level, not minimum wage. And it's an expensive income in order to afford a 2-bedroom. Now, this is a 2-bedroom. So if you have 2 wage earners living in that 1-bedroom, then you can divide the 78 by 2 income earners and it gets much more affordable. But we also recognize that not every 2-bedroom unit has 2 wage earners in it. If there's a single parent, for example, in a 2-bedroom unit, then that single parent is probably the only wage earner. And so that's how we get to affordability levels. If somebody does not make $78,000 a year, it doesn't mean they can't rent a 2-bedroom apartment. It just means that month over month, a larger percentage of their gross monthly income is going towards rent than is what is recommended. And so that's what we see probably. A lot of people who don't make $78,000 a year renting 2-bedroom apartments and just paying a larger percentage of their gross monthly income towards their housing expense. The other thing I want to point out to you guys is that when we survey apartment complexes, we ask what they charge in rent. And the $1,955 is what the rent charge is. For most apartment complex, that does not include utilities. So specifically, 92.7% of the market rate complexes we surveyed do not include electric charges in their rental rates. So those electricity expenses would be in addition to the 1955. 71% of market rate complexes do not include gas in their rental rates. Once again, that gets added to the monthly budget for a renter, increasing the housing costs if you're including rent plus utilities. And then the last utility we ask about is water and sewer charges. So 52.7% of market rate complexes do not include water and sewer in their rental rates. So the majority of gas, electric, and sewer are additional expenses that a household would have to cover in excess of the $1,955 a month. Any questions on this slide? All right, so then that's what it takes to be affordable, but then we also looked at minimum wage. And this slide here is adjusted. So when we issued our rental attainability report in November, minimum wage was a little lower and then minimum wage increased January 1. So we redid the math for the slide purposes because it felt weird to give you data that we know is not accurate. So now minimum wage is $18.35 an hour. And so in order, once again, to afford that 2-bedroom apartment, someone would need to work 2 full-time jobs in order to hit a 30% housing ratio. And once again, if you have 2 income earners, then that makes sense. If you have 2 minimum wage full-time income earners in a 2-bedroom apartment, it's affordable. The challenge comes in when you don't have 2 full-time wage earners in an apartment, which we know happens often. Maybe it's 1.5 full-time jobs, or maybe it's just 1, and that's where folks are probably struggling to be able to afford rent. Any questions on this slide? All right. And then we start looking at some other things. So affordability is one piece of the puzzle, but what's happening with stability? And so stability in our market can be seen in things like actual rental averages increasing a little bit, decreasing a little bit. Another indicator has to do with the vacancy rate. And so our vacancy rate in this survey was 5.98%. So that's how many units in market rate complexes are currently vacant. This data is good and consistent. So last year our vacancy rate was 6.76%. So it's gone down a little bit, but it's above our historic norms. And so that's really helpful. It's the second lowest or the second highest vacancy rate we've seen since we started gathering data. In addition to that, 5 complexes representing 677 units reported offering incentives. This is the first time we've gotten that indicator from market rate complexes. And so incentives include things like waiving fees, temporary free or reduced rent, and one place was even doing raffle prizes to attract new applicants. So all of those are signs of stabilization and a softening of the rental market, which could lead to more affordability for renters if rents are pressured to stay the same or go down, vacancy rates are higher, and then more market rate property management companies start offering incentives to get people in. So all signs of at least stabilization, if not a softening of the rental market.
Ivana, before you move on, could I ask a question about that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I assume you have the data, but I'm curious if you looked at whether or not this vacancy rate is due to fewer renters or more units.
So we don't really have a good way of capturing that. My gut says it's more units, right? So we're not seeing a reduction of rental, like it's not like a huge multifamily property went off the market, for example, and then that increased the supply. We're seeing the opposite of that with increases to inventory. And so my guess is that it has to do with inventory, not a reduction of renters. I don't see that our population has decreased significantly or that a huge segment of the population is now no longer renting. I think this has to do with supply, if I had to guess. That's Devana's kind of sense of what's happening.
Great, thank you. I want to throw another potential out, which is more people sharing units than maybe we would like.
Or yeah, so a lack of household creation, right? So the number of people are the same, they're just in smaller household units.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that could easily be due to affordability, right? So like you get a roommate because you can't afford rent. So, and if that wasn't the case, then each of you might have your own rental unit. Yeah. That could be happening.
Okay, but we don't have the level of detail that we would need to be able to answer that question.
No, and I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't know how we gather it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I don't know either. I was hoping you would tell us.
Yeah, market rate complexes aren't, I mean, they barely answer the questions when we call them, let alone like, can we dig into the data on your like tenants? Like we're not getting that. So I'm not sure how we'd figure that out, but it's an interesting question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then another thing we looked at this year has to do with income requirements. So we started asking market rate complexes about the minimum income a household would have in order to rent from you. And then, so this works in two ways, right? So if the minimum income is less, it's a lower barrier for folks to get in. If the minimum income is higher, then you have to make more income in order to afford to be able to just move into that unit. On the flip side, though, if the minimum income is 1 times the rent or they don't have requirements, then a household could move in there and be housing cost burdened, right? If you're only requiring people to show income that covers rent, that's crazy, but 12 complexes do that. And that means somebody could be paying 100% of their gross monthly income on housing. In those cases, I doubt most people are. It's probably that their income is higher than that or they don't have a limit. But 12 complexes that we talk to really are 0 times rent or you have to show you at least make what the rent is. 16 complexes say you have to make at least 1.5 times to 2 times the rent. Even at 2 times the rent, a household moving in would have a 50% housing ratio, which according to the data and the norms, that's a housing cost burdened household. So the barrier to the bar to get in is lower, but you're still looking at folks in who are your renters then paying a larger percentage of their gross monthly income on housing costs. And then 27 complexes are 2.5 to 3 times rent. And that 3 times is where you get, your affordability metrics is, but then once again, you have to demonstrate higher income to just even be able to apply and move into a unit. So we thought this was kind of interesting to see what was happening in the market. And then finally, we started a few years ago looking at how many units does our community have that are restricted to or available to lower income households. And so this year, that number was 2,043, which is a really exciting number. Like we've broken 2,000 units. It increased year over year by 190 units, which is a significant increase in that inventory. It's broken down on the rental attainability report in a mix of ways. So, for example, the Housing Authority is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here with 345 public housing and Clark Homes units. which are managed by the Housing Authority, and 566 housing choice vouchers or housing vouchers. I'm sorry, that's all of the vouchers that they manage. I recognize there's some sub programs in there. And then there's 168 rental program units that were incentivized or required by the city of Flagstaff through development agreements or the incentive policy or negotiations with private sector developers who say we're going to do 10% affordable to folks under 80% AMI, for example. So 168 units out of that pool. And then there's 822 low-income housing tax credit units, which I know Sarah will talk about here shortly. Housing Solutions has 98 units and Catholic Charities has 44. So we're excited about this increase, quite frankly. It's great news. But I do want to put the caveat out there that it would have been higher this year if we had not lost 135 units that were low-income housing tax credit units that converted to market rate through a qualified contract process. So they did not finish their affordability requirement. They petitioned to the Department of Housing to be able to convert to market rate early. And were granted that requirement after going through the regulatory review period. So 135 units lost in our community would have then increased our year over year by that many additional units had they not gone to market rate. So we did add 221 new low-income units at Sierra on 66, 45 by Housing Solutions, and then 3 units added by Catholic Charities. These don't reflect additional units under development. So if there's additional low-income housing tax credit properties that might come online or additional units through the City of Flagstaff incentive program, those would be reflected when they come onto the market in future years. So there could be additional units in the queue in that development pipeline that we haven't realized yet as a community because it takes time to create units. But this is our snapshot for right now. The other quick data to tell you about is kind of some of the barriers for move-in. So 80% of market rate complexes do charge an application fee per adult. That average application fee is $57 per person. 66% of market rate complexes charge an administration fee in addition to the application fee or first month's rent or security deposit. An average administration fee is $270 per household. My God, wouldn't it be nice to be like, hey, we have to do admin, so we're going to charge you for that. Like, I find this fee to be fascinating to me because it's kind of, in my mind, it should be built into the money that they make from rent, quite frankly. I don't understand why a tenant has to pay for a property manager's admin, but 66% of market rate complexes are charging it and is not insignificant. And then 47% of market rate complexes participate in dynamic pricing. And that's where rental rates change daily based on an algorithm and a subscription service that looks at demand, vacancy rates, et cetera, across multiple properties. So if you call and ask about available units and what's the rent today, it won't be guaranteed if you call back the next day, which makes it really hard for people to shop for housing units and to know what rent will be when they come back in to apply in a week, whatever. And then 100% of market rate complexes conduct both criminal background checks and credit checks as part of their application process. So if you have any blips on your criminal history or blips on your credit, that might be a barrier to moving into a rental unit. So anyway, that's kind of the snapshot picture we've got going on. I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have, but appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all.
Thank you, Devonna. Do any members of the commission have any questions or comments? I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any C's or Q's in the chat. Devonna, I have one more question. Do you know if the low income restricted units, like the ones that aged out or had their contracts closed out by the Department of Housing, do you know if there's public record about those units so that we can be better prepared in the future to understand the impacts?
Yeah, so the process for going through qualified contract is a public one. There's a so any owner or developer of a low-income housing tax credit property that wants to apply for qualified contract has to submit an application to the Department of Housing. And that application is pretty intense. It has, your financials and minimum qualified bid price. And essentially the Department of Housing is looking for someone to come in and buy that property and keep it affordable. And it has to be advertised for a year. So there's a year's opportunity for someone else to come in, acquire the property or negotiate an agreement for sale with the current owner and then keep it affordable. That process allows for a change to the affordability requirements. So like if you had some units subsidized down to serving households at 20% area median income or 30% area median income, the new buyer could say, well, it doesn't pencil. I need units to serve 50% area median income for my rental mix. So it doesn't guarantee everything stays the same, but it does guarantee affordability under 60% area median income for at least the compliance period. The challenge is that somebody has to come in and be able to afford the minimum bid price and to get the purchase. So they rarely get a buyer through this process.
Right. Okay.
And then at the end of the advertising period, if there is no buyer, then the current owner can convert to market rate. They get out of their obligations. And so that's typically what happens with this process is that they advertise for a year and then at the end of the year, they convert to market rate. So it is public. So that's one piece of it. The Department of Housing got smart along the way, and they started saying if you want to apply for tax credits, you have to waive your right to a qualified contract in order to get the tax credit. So these are projects that were placed in service years ago that have the opportunity to do qualified contracts. Newer developments don't have that same opportunity. They have committed to the compliance period and waived their right to a qualified contract. So in theory, over time, we will see fewer qualified contracts and properties will have to complete their compliance period, which is great news, right? Like, so you didn't commit to 15 years and get out in year 10 or 30 years and whatever it is, you have to at least abide by the promise you made as a developer on the front end to get the tax credits. With that being said, there is a sunset for every low-income housing tax credit property, whether it's through qualified contract or at the end of their compliance period. And I think as a community, we need to pay attention to that too, because it might be a longer horizon, but this will still potentially happen in year 31 instead of year 15 to folks. And it's still a displacement. It's still an impact to tenants who have been there. And so as a community, we should maybe look at, and Sarah wrote a C, so she might have this data, like which units do we have now? When does their compliance period end? Are they eligible for qualified contract? And are we paying attention to this? Because even if we've added 190 units, the 135 tenants in those properties have been impacted negatively. And so as a community, we probably should be looking at this more closely. And I at least, and I think the city too, has been advocating for additional resources so that somebody could come in and buy a property under qualified contract and have money to subsidize the purchase, right? Like the reason they're not getting sold is because it doesn't pencil. And so are there resources for preservation that we can look at as a city or community or state, because it would be great to be able to save some of these properties. I think we've had 4 go through qualified contract in the last 2 or 3 years in Flagstaff. That's a big hit to our inventory. And I don't know what's coming down the road, but I'll shut up now because I know Sarah has.
Thank you for that very thorough and enlightening answer, Devana. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right, I don't see any. So Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I put the comment in first before Devana punted to me, but I want to start with saying how grateful that city staff and organization is that Housing Solutions does this work. It's not something we've had the capacity for, and it's something that coming from a local nonprofit is received very different than if we were doing it. And the data is very, very useful to us in helping us educate HUD on what our actual conditions are. Devonna mentioned how that fair market rents are not really an accurate measurement. The fair market rent data is calculated on such a narrow scope. It's data on recent mover households for 2-bedroom units. And getting recent mover data outside of Flagstaff is difficult. And it's also, it tracks 2 years behind. It's based on American Community Survey data, which tracks 2 years behind. And so it's pretty frustrating. We've even had one of the head economists for HUD, we whined and advocated for so long. HUD actually sent an economist out several years ago to talk to us and talk to the community and city council about how these are calculated and what our options are, which are few, and the ones that do exist are expensive with very short-term results. So giving us data to be able to talk to not only HUD, but the development community about what rents look like, help educate the public that may be owners, longtime owners, about what rent really costs in Flagstaff is really valuable data. And we're extremely grateful for Housing Solutions' willingness not only to gather it, but to share that information widely. On the second thing, punting, we have on our to-do list to make the expiration date of tax credits. Devonna did say this date has gotten wiser over time. So have we. And I'll talk about this in the next presentation, but I did want to point out that the properties that have gone through the qualified allocation process in the last few years are still working with our voucher clients. They did not clean the properties out. They shifted rents and are still working with voucher clients through the Housing Authority. So that there's a glimmer in that, but it's really a small one. So thank you for letting me add a comment.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any members of the public, and do any members of the public have any comments? Okay, then we will move on to Sarah's presentation on the low-income housing tax credit program.
Thank you. I'm working on screen sharing, and I'm hoping that this works.
Looks
My
good
screen
to
just
me.
went to my screensaver. Let's see what you guys can see.
I can
Okay.
see slide 1.
You can see slide 1. Excellent
Yes.
news, and not in presentation view, right? Yep, I see it.
Nope.
Okay. I like it when I can operate technology. I'm going to turn my camera off so I don't slow down. Okie dokie. All right. At commission request, it was an overview of how low-income housing tax credits work. So this is a pretty high-level flyover. I want to thank Aiden Rutledge for assisting greatly in putting this presentation together. He put this presentation together and let me edit a couple things. And so thank you, Aiden, for your work on this. It's very appreciated. So we're going to talk about low-income housing tax credit, what it is, how it works in Arizona, what it's done in our community. So that's our overview slide. Along the housing continuum piece, which I know you are all familiar with, but this is really, it is this. I don't know what just happened. There we go. It's this teal color right here, affordable rentals. And to the left-hand side is really where you see a bulk of government funding and nonprofit interactions. Unsheltered, emergency shelters, transitional housing, public housing, and vouchers. This is based in governmental funding or grants, foundation, nonprofit funding. This piece of affordable rentals is really where the public and private money meet. And so you see we have listed here both LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit. I'm going to say LIHTC. There's a consultant that we've worked with in the past from down south, and she says LIHTC. So we don't, we're just going to say LIHTC. And the incentive policy for affordable housing, which is where there's public money intersecting with private money, and to be able to work to create affordable rentals. IPA can also work with affordable ownership. And as we move, this is much more to the left, is much heavier governmental funding, getting lighter and lighter, moving to the right. And so this is really a good, strong relationship between both public and private entities to bring additional affordable rental units to market. This is the primary federal tool for affordable rental housing. And it is actually an IRS program. It is not a HUD program. A lot of folks assume that it is HUD, but it is an IRS program that can be coupled with HUD programs, but it is actually funded through IRS. It targets low-income individuals and families, and it supports the creation of new units or the rehabilitation of existing ones. And then Devana already talked through this about the commitment period of maintaining affordable rents. Arizona now requires a 30-year commitment, which we also do in anything where we're coming in with money. And we caught on a little earlier than the state and started requiring the 30-year commitment prior to them requiring the waiver of the qualified contract process. So history of LIHTC is it was started in 1986 as part of the Tax Reform Act, and it was created in response to the federal government starting to want to get out of the public housing business. Public housing is expensive, and this was designed to do exactly what it did, which was to shift affordable housing production in the rental market towards private creation. So when we talk about LIHTC, it's different than other programs, and they are designed to serve 60% of AMI and below in the affordable units. You can do a mixed income project. I'll talk about that in a minute. We only have one in Flagstaff. Typically what we see up here is 100% affordable serving 60% and below. I'm going to go a little bit technical here. 40% of the development must be reserved for families earning no more than 60% AMI. 20% must be skewed even deeper to 50%. And within the competitive process for the 9% credits, you can actually skew your rents even lower, down to 30% and below for extra points. And it's all about money. It's about how the project pencils. It's about what rents can be charged to what households to create ongoing income for the project that can support whatever debt load is existing after the credits. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. I also cannot see questions if they come up. So if somebody could punt to me if you see questions, that'd be great. Thank you. So in a nutshell, this is an extremely complex process called down to 4 steps. So the federal government allocates tax credits to state government, where the state government then allocates to the state housing agencies. Usually that's seamless. It quite often looks like it just goes directly from federal to the state housing agency. That amount of money received by each state is determined by a per population formula. That's the information on white right here. So there was actually a 12% increase in the tax credit basis contained in the Big Beautiful Bill last year, which made the credit go from $3 per person in 2025 to $3.416 per person in 2026. I know if you math that, it is not 12%, but this is the actual published number, but it's based on 12%. So I can't tell you what else is in there. But that's a lovely increase, which gives each state more money in tax credits to award because the demand is out there. So through a process we'll talk about in a minute, but in the very simple overview is developers apply for these tax credits, and then the state selects projects based on how the project competes through the qualified allocation process, addressing the state's housing needs. Now here's where the money comes in. So when the developer is awarded the credits, they then sell these creditors to investors who claim them on their federal, or in the case of state housing tax credit, on their tax returns. So we're talking about investors like American Express or JP Morgan Chase, or major corporations buy these tax credits. And let's talk pricing for a second. For the last several years, the pricing has been in the high 90-cent range. So these are not sold dollar for dollar. They are sold below the dollar mark. In the early 90s, they were sold at 40 to 50 cent on the dollar. In the peaks went up to exceeding $1. I think the highest we saw was $1.05, $1.07 per credit in high demand markets just before tax reform in 2017. And then it's settled in the 2020s to the mid to high 90-cent range. So the corporations buy these tax credits, which then give the developers upfront cash for development, meaning they can finance less development cost, meaning there's less debt service on the property, allowing lower rents to be charged on units on an ongoing basis. I hope that was clearer than mud, but that's the basic flow of where the money comes from. All right. So there's two different types of tax credits and they operate pretty differently. I'm going to talk about 4% on this page and really that's it. We'll focus mainly on the 9%. Those are more prolific. Although I think we're seeing a shift to the 4%. So the 4% credits they're based on tax-exempt private activity bonds tied to each state's annual volume cap for those, which is a federal limit set by populations, and then states can issue those for various purposes. And so the 4% credits cover less of the project's total construction costs, and they are considered awarded on a rolling basis. It's not there's a once a year deadline, and then they are evaluated and awarded. It's a less competitive process, but it's still based in the qualifying criteria within the QAP. So the tax-exempt private activity bonds, or PABs, are then awarded to the developer, which then they can sell in order to acquire that upfront funding. And we quite often see 4% are for larger projects, meaning typically over 200 units. On the 9% credits, smaller, usually under 200 units, sometimes under 100 units. And the 4% are non-competitive. It's kind of a first come, first serve. It still goes through a very public, very extraneous process to be awarded those credits for use. So the 9% credits allow a developer to use more of the credits towards the project. Usually
Sarah,
covers
I'm going to interrupt real quick.
Yes.
I'm sorry, there's a question in the chat from Anya. Anya, I don't know if you want to ask it or if you want me to read it. I'm happy to do either.
Good afternoon. I was just wondering, so the investor purchases the tax credits, right? So they're assigned to him, to the investor, and then do they use it against their income, or how does the investor use the tax credit?
The investor, once the units are occupied, is allowed to claim the tax credit on their annual taxes for a period of 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I have a little bit more detail on that coming up. So the 9% credits, there's an annual application process, and it is much more competitive than the 4%. It is highly competitive. And it's not cheap to apply for these. There are all kinds of requirements, market studies. There's a $5,000 application fee. It's not something you put together overnight. It's not something you really, by the seat of your pants, apply for. So we're going to focus on the 9% credits. That's what has created the most units in our community. The only 4% project in our community is the new Sierra on 66. You may also hear it called the Roars Project out on West Route 66 past Woody Mountain Road. That's the first 4%, and it just opened. And so that's the first 4% project we've seen in Flagstaff. So the QAP, or the Qualified Allocation Plan, sets forth the criteria for developers, and developers can be for-profit or nonprofit, to apply for tax credits. It has priorities and scoring criteria, all of these lovely things. The QAP is currently updated every 2 years. Overall, although they can make minor annual tweaks, the QAP must be signed by the governor in order to then be released to the public. And quite often, folks get frustrated with city staff when we're working to support one of these because it always feels like it's the last minute. Well, the QAP is usually released in mid to late December, and the deadline is April 1st. And so you really have to have your ducks in a row before the QAP, the final, is released. There's drafts released, so you have generally an idea of what's coming. But it's a very short application window. They do have public hearings on the QAP criteria, requirements that we attend. We offer comment in both verbally sometimes and in writing on things. There's a lot of focus on metro areas in the southern part of the state. For example, it's been years since this has happened, but at one point in time, they were incentivizing white roofs. And we had to write in and say, do you mean white roofs, or are you looking for energy efficiency? And their answer was, oh, energy efficiency. Right, okay. So transit-oriented design, they had points for, and it was if projects were placed on or near the light rail. So we wrote in and said, do you mean light rail, or do you mean public transit? And it turned out that they had a specific project in mind, and in that case, they meant light rail, but they also assigned points for rural areas for location near public transit. So it's something we pay attention to. We often speak with the development community that often applies for these to be able to say, what are you seeing? Do you need support on any concepts? We often share our ideas and concerns. And we found the Department of Housing is most often very, very receptive to feedback as far as ideas within the QAP. So the deadline is April 1st, or if April 1st is on a weekend, it's on a day surrounding that weekend. When they first changed it to April 1st, we kind of thought it was a joke. It's not a joke. So scoring criteria, number of units, what's the community doing? What are the locations like? Proximity to amenities is huge. And by amenities, they're talking about grocery stores and public transit and schools and healthcare facilities, those types of things. And so that really drives the location of a lot of these. And it makes sense because you want low-income individuals positioned to be successful within a community. But it also means that a lot of the development you see is often concentrated in city centers or in activity centers within a community because they are seeking the points related to proximity to amenities. There is a category allowing for rehabilitation of existing LIHTC units. We've had one development here in town that was built in 1997, and in year 14, right before their expiration, it was sold. And if you could see me, I'm using air quotes as sold, because it was sold to a corporation made up of a lot of the same players, but it allowed tax credits to be invested in the property to rehabilitate it, to modernize it. It added a unit to it, and rehabilitation of those is of course often cheaper than new construction. One of the other big things we'll talk about related to LIHTC for Flagstaff is a rural versus metro allocation. So Arizona receives around 22 million annually. That's in the past. I did not update this number for the coming year. And they award, and this will be the same for 25-26, there's a rural set aside of 3 tax credit applications. So and rural is, you can see here, thank you, Aiden. Rural is 13 counties, and Pima and Maricopa are the only metropolitan counties. So the balance of state is what it's called for rural. In 24-25, there were 3 rural awards and 7 metropolitan awards. So ADO will make up to 3 9% LIHTC awards in rural counties if there are sufficient eligible applications. I don't recall a year where there were not sufficient applications. They may not have the highest points. There's also a tribal set aside of 2 awards for tribal projects. And then there's a new one that came in a couple years ago called Innovation or Unique Opportunities, where they say they may or may not award credits to 1 application outside the QAP scoring selection criteria based on 1 or more of the following considerations: unique construction methods, innovative approach to development, scale of community impact, regional distribution, unique funding or leveraging opportunities, and disaster recovery. Discovery is disaster and recovery combined. Disaster recovery response. And this category is solely at the discretion of ADO. This category was added to allow them to be responsive to things that are changing within our world. So if there is something that comes in that is unique or taking advantage of a unique opportunity, that there's still an ability to do that without waiting another entire calendar year for that. Okay. So we
There's a
used to
Zillow.
have, yes? Did I hear somebody?
I
Okay,
thought I
okay.
heard somebody, but
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. That was me. Sorry.
Oh,
okay.
no worries. So we had in 2021, Arizona created the Arizona State Housing Tax Credit. There are, I believe, 31 states, including Arizona and the District of Columbia, that have a state we had. So I'm going to say have, but not anymore. So in 2021, we became the 32nd state to create a state housing tax credit, which works similarly to the federal, except that it was at the state level. Legislature allocated $4 million per year for 4 years. And it was intended to leverage the federal LIHTC money. So as construction costs have increased, as the legal fees associated with doing these deals, et cetera, have increased, the tax credit dollars don't go quite as far. So there's always a need for gap financing. The state housing tax credit worked to finance projects, to add a little bit more money to projects that were already awarded the 9% credits. Unfortunately, this program sunsetted in 2025. And we are the first state to establish and then end a state housing tax credit. It's not really a distinction I think we want. However, there is an effort this year that we've been working on and there's 2 bills in the House, 2644 and 2804. It looks like the language is identical, but with different sponsors. I haven't had a chance to compare them exactly word for word, but it is asking to reinstate the state housing tax credit at $2 million specifically only for rural. And so do we know where these bills are going to go? No, we're like 2.5 weeks into the legislative session. But there is at least some discussion around the value of the state housing tax credit coming back on a limited basis. There were efforts made to renew it last year. The legislature unfortunately chose not to. And so this was it. I mean, $4 million per year for 4 years doesn't sound like a ton of money, but that money can really be critical in closing some gaps there. So when you see a tax credit award, let me look ahead. Okay. Yes, I do have this coming up. I'm going to pause that thought and go here. So local impact here in Flagstaff. These are the developments that have received tax credits. You can see down here is utilized qualified contract process 402. units. Village at Lake Mary was a long time ago. These three are one developer, and they've been successful in utilizing that process, unfortunately. Fortunately for them, they did not break the rules. They did not do anything wrong. For Flagstaff, the average development size is 64 units, with the smallest is Sharon Manor 2 with 16 units, and the largest for 9% is 124, which was Village at Lake Mary. You can see the numbers for the bulk of them are under 100. And except for 221, the Sierra on 66 at the top, that is the 4% project. So we have actually partnered in some way, shape, or form on all of these. For example, on, I'm looking for the name, Cedar Crest, used to be known as Mountainside Village. This is the one that rehabilitated the units at year 14 and re-upped their affordability commitment for an additional 30 years. We actually sold the land to the developer. They make interest-only payments with a balloon at the end, and that's why we were able to insist on longer affordability requirements within that one. And then when they renewed or went and refinanced essentially through tax credits for rehab, we were able to renew that affordability agreement and extend it. So I would say that's the one we've had the most, where we had the largest investment. Some of these we have about $100,000 in, and you would think, why in a multi-million-dollar project would $100,000 make a difference? Well, the QAP has points for local involvement. And while it's just a drop in the bucket for development purposes, this is so highly competitive, 1 or 2 points can make a difference between an award and not an award. So that $100,000 that we put out as a loan typically makes a difference in award factors occasionally. And we always make those contingent on award of tax credits. If they don't get tax credits, they don't get the money. And so you can see the units here. We have not had a successful tax credit, and I say we, the city doesn't apply for these at this point in time. In coming years, that will be different, but we typically have not. So I say we as a partnership with developers, or we as the community haven't had a tax credit award. And that's for a couple different reasons. It seems to fluctuate. The reasons tend to fluctuate. And they're very project dependent. It's not like Flagstaff has been targeted or blackballed, any of those things. It's project dependent on what's coming in. Construction in rural areas is often more expensive than construction in metropolitan areas, so the credits tend to go further. And Department of Housing also put in, which we have requested to change, and I don't know if this one was successful in being changed this year or not, but where developers are allowed one application a year. One successful application a year. And so they've stopped turning in multiple, like one for rural and one for metropolitan. And that was our request is, don't just say one award per year. They can do multiple applications, but they're only going to get one award, is to say you could get one award in rural and one award in metro. So that we weren't being passed over for the larger, more lucrative projects in the major metropolitan areas that have way more resources than we do. So with that, we have an example for you. So Villas on Lake Mary, besides Sierra on 66. So this one opened in 2024. There are 76 units. It is 100% affordable. I'm going to go back one slide. The only mixed rate development we've ever had, mixed income development, is Star Point in Flagstaff. And they have 68 affordable units. I want to say they have 7 market rate. It's not significant. And we often see that the 100% affordable units up here pencil better. The other things is that the incentives that we have, both regulatory and financial incentives from the city side, are more lucrative if you're doing 100% affordable. So examples here, income limit Villas on Lake Mary at 60%. Their LIHTC award in 2021 was $2 million. And you're thinking $2 million is nothing. They get an award of $2 million But the corporations that's $2 million per year. So they sell the corporation. Wow, my brain just went blank. I'm sorry. They sell the corporation $2 million. They are able to claim that over 10 years. So it's $20 million. Yes, add a zero. Good job, Sarah. They sell $20 million worth of credits. They get back, let's say it was 90 cents on the dollar. They get back that amount for upfront construction financing. So it's never enough money. We were able to support this project with $325 in incentive funds, which is city money, and then $397 in ARPA funds, which is federal money. They also were able to access zoning code incentives using a density bonus, a parking reduction, and a landscape reduction. So when folks say, hey, city, how are you guaranteeing that the city's investment in these affordable units is being protected? We're really the small hammer in this box, because the corporations that are claiming the tax credits must prove the low income occupancy, and that's done through some very intense auditing, et cetera. We just ask for a copy of those reports to show that they're in compliance, because the corporations, without being able to prove the income occupancy and the developments, are unable to claim the tax credit. And so it's vastly in their favor to make sure that these things are in compliance. I'm not aware of any development in Flagstaff that has been out of compliance with their investor requirements or with ours, in all of my time working here with the city. That is a very high level flyover. I'd be happy to answer questions. I want to give some kudos here to Jen Michelson and to Sully Moore and Justina Costa, who are the primary staff that work with the tax credit developers that call. We field probably half a dozen or more interested developers per year. We have several things working in our favor that bring extra points to development in this arena. And so fairly often we have developers saying, hey, we'd like to chat with you about this site, or what does this look like? And that team does an excellent job of working with those development teams. And I believe this year we are anticipating a tax credit application coming out of well, not from us, a tax credit application being made for a project in our community.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So, okay. I was going to say there's a question in the chat, but it was apparently just answered.
Okie dokie.
Does the commission, anybody else on the commission, have any questions or comments? All right. I don't see any C's or Q's in the chat. Oh, I see another Q from Devana. Go ahead, Devana.
Sorry, Sarah answered the question about the crystal ball for this year, and if we thought any things were coming forward. But my other question has to do with RAD and public housing. So I think there's a future intersection between LIHTC and RAD. Is that accurate? And if so, can you just quickly explain how that might work together?
I can. I'm not sure that the commission has the same knowledge you do about what RAD is. So RAD is the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program by HUD, which is a program to revitalize or redevelop public housing units. And it's the project that we are looking at. It's the program we'll be utilizing to redevelop our public housing sites here in Flagstaff. And so we can only ever have 265 units of public housing due to an act of Congress called the Fair Cloth Act. And so while we'll be able to increase the number of units on our public housing sites because of their low density, we can only ever receive affordability subsidies for 265 of those units. So to increase the number of affordable units, we'll have to utilize other funding sources, and LIHTC is one of the biggest funding sources, coupled with RAD to increase unit counts. And in fact, there are some preferences within the QAP specifically for housing authorities or nonprofits utilizing the RAD process in order to create additional units. It's a coupling of two very powerful funding sources that leverage each other very, very well. So in the coming years, it's possible there could be a 2027 application, LIHTC application for RAD, but that is if absolutely all of the stars and the moon and all the planets line up in a fantastic formation that allow us to hit the 2027 deadline. I think 2028 is more likely. And the planetary scientist who serves as the chair of the commission can tell you how rare it is that we have perfect planetary alignment. So while we're striving for that, I think it's more realistic that we will hit a 2028 deadline. But we haven't written off 2027 if we're able to get there. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you. And then are you guys looking at one LIHTC application or would this be like a multi-year thing?
That has yet to be determined, except that we have two main sites. And so given relocation requirements, it's likely going to require us to develop those as separate projects. So I would say that it would be 2 tax credit applications. The duration between those applications has yet to be determined.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Devonna. Thank you, Sarah. We have a comment from Jennifer Michelson.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to go back to the LIHTC project that we are anticipating, that Sarah mentioned, just like a little bit more information about it. It's it's called Lone Tree Ranch, and it's intended to be a 4% LIHTC project. The developer on it is called Lincoln Ave, and they're a little unique because they're the only developers I've been aware of that have submitted for rezoning to achieve a LIHTC project. So they're in the process of, the rezoning application process with the city. They've been working with us for up to 2 years now. So I just wanted to emphasize that they've invested a little bit extra time and money to achieve their affordable housing project, a little bit more than would be desirable, I think, for LIHTC developers. So we don't have public hearing dates for that rezoning case yet. I think they're hoping for March, April. So I'll let the commissioners know when they'll be at the Planning and Zoning Commission first, and then council for their rezoning. So just wanted to let you guys know. And it's I'm having a hard, it's 168 units, I think. So that's how big that project is.
Thank
Great,
you,
thank
Jen. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that development is coming in on some land that has a surviving old development agreement obligation. And when I say old, I think it predates my 25 years here. So it's surviving and they're coming in on that property and they're exceeding what that development agreement obligation was.
For sure. Yeah,
Okay.
That older ordinance is part of the reason why they have to go through the extra rezoning process to change the current affordability commitment associated with that platted area. So yeah, so it's definitely worthwhile. I'm pretty sure council will be pretty excited to hear about this rezoning case, but yeah, it's just been a lengthy process for them. And I'm excited for them to be finishing up pretty soon. So, yeah.
And it's an example of where sometimes we say we negotiate with the developer and there's a commitment, and then we see something not built and not built and not built and not built. And then all of a sudden there's a different developer interested in that land and those requirements survive. And so, sometimes we don't see fruits of labor for many years.
Thank you so much. Devonna, I'm going to jump in with a question of my own and then I'll come back to you. Is that okay? Or is it directly related was it directly related to Jennifer's comment?
Well, it kind of was. So to me, Jen, that's a 4% deal that is not on the April 1st, 9% deadline. So Do we have any coming forward to meet that April 1st deadline? I thought that's what Sarah was talking about.
No, we do not have, I think we were, we've had, I was thinking last summer and fall, I think we had about 4 LIHTC projects all up in the air, all in different phases of potential, both 9% and 4%, and a couple of them fell off. The most promising 9% deal fell off. It was with the FUSD property. FUSD is really interested in trying to pursue a LIHTC project on their property, but that developer couldn't really get it to make sense at this time, so they did not end up applying.
And the other 9% group that had expressed interest and was working within the community encountered challenges with the site that they had chosen that made it more expensive. And I don't think they've given up on Flagstaff, but they definitely won't be applying for this coming round. And we don't often talk about who's applying for what, because it is it's a very competitive process. And so we don't want to be feeding developers like, hey, you know, who else is applying for this over here? They take care of that communication. And well, if they asked, it is public information, but we work to remain impartial to all of them.
Thank you for the clarification.
Great, thank you. That actually leads into my couple of questions. The first one is, as I understand it, there's a mandatory information session that's available like once for a 2-year application period. Is that correct, from the city or from the state?
It's a mandatory annually.
Oh, it's annual.
To apply, you need to attend the information session. And then now there's a pre-application piece where you must express interest in order to turn in a final application, which gives the Department of Housing a chance to kind of get a handle on what is likely coming their way. They can also do something which is called pre-allocating is not the right word, advance allocation. So they can award from the following year's credits, which they've been doing because things have been so expensive, which is really where that increase in credits this year will really, really help the state catch up a little bit. And so there are some years that are a little bit leaner in those credit issuances because they've been issued or obligated, pre-obligation, that's the word I'm looking for. They've been pre-obligated to projects that were awarded in the past.
Okay, so have you found or heard from developers that one time a year mandatory information session is any kind of a barrier to applications?
Not really, no.
Okay.
The barrier is the fact that we have a once a year application, not the requirements going with it. This is a really specialized field. And so it's either something you do or you don't do. Yeah, we don't have developers that kind of dabble in it. It's either but there are other states that have multiple rounds per year. We've talked to Department of Housing about that. Devana and Sandy Flores and I think it was the 3 of us, went down to chat about LIHTC and other funding opportunities and talked about, you know, what about a twice a year funding round? And it is so competitive. They have enough applications coming in. ADO is not, I don't know how to, ADO does not have excess staff. And so this is a very labor intense process. And so not only the application, but then all the requirements following up with them. There's also a placed in service date. It can't just linger. So if your tax credit awards are usually announced in June or July, they have until December 31st, 2.5 years later, to get everything built and a certificate of occupancy issued. And so they're also looking at project readiness, and as developers find out what the credit market is worth, what their syndicators say they can sell the credits for, all of those things. It's kind of a really dynamic process for probably the first 6 to 8 months after award, where they're trying to line up all the other funding sources, put bow ties on all their little ducks standing in a row in order to be able to break ground. So, and Department of Housing is very involved, as they can be, to be supportive throughout that process as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. That was incredibly informative. Do we have any more comments or questions from the commission on LIHTC? I will also point the commissioners to a comment by Councilmember House and by Adriana Fisher in the chat, pointing to the federal RAD information as well as the city of Flagstaff's RAD information. All right, moving on to item number 8, informational items to and from commission member staff and future agenda item requests. 8A is an update from the Housing Authority Liaison, who is myself, and Sarah will save me as usual from anything I don't cover or forget. At the Housing Authority board meeting on, do I have the date in front of me? On the 15th of January, we approved 2 resolutions, one to update Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Administration Plan, and one to update the Admissions and Continued Occupancy Plan. These are both required plans in order to remain qualified for Housing Authority funding, so these had to be done. There's details in there that I'm not going to go into detail unless Sarah wants to go into specifics, but these are kind of a thing that we generally have to do. I think it's every 5 years. Is that correct, Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. Sometimes the ones we just did are implementation of the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act called HOPMA, which HUD's been working on implementation for a number of years. And so when they say, okay, now it's time for these, we do those. And so we'll still have a little bit more of HOPMA to implement because there are a few requirements where the HUD computer systems are not able to handle the data that they're not able to handle what we're being required to do. And so we've done all the changes except the ones that HUD is not set up for us to actually do. So you were spot
we had an
on
entertaining
everything
conversation
else
about
with the
that.
time frame. What's that?
Yeah, and we had an entertaining conversation about that at the board meeting as well. All right, thank you, Sarah. Item 8B. Oh, go ahead. What was that? Okay. Item 8B is update from housing commissioners and other informational items. Do we have any more updates from housing commissioners? Okay, I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any C's or Q's in the chat, so I'll move to 8C, update from housing staff. Do we have any updates from housing staff? I have a C from Christine Pavlik.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Pavlik, Housing and Grants Administrator for the City Housing Division, and I just have 2 quick updates. One on behalf of the Coconino County Continuum of Care. Most of you have heard of the point in time count. This is a count of unsheltered homeless folks in our county. This count is required by HUD, and it helps us secure funding for shelter services, emergency housing programs. It's going to be undertaken next week, and they are looking for volunteers. Usually it's like a 2 to 3 hour time period next Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So if you might be interested in volunteering, it's really impactful and meaningful volunteer opportunity. Reach out to me and I can get you that information for volunteering. And then another upcoming volunteer opportunity will be for our Community Development Block Grant Program. We are kicking off next Thursday our Notice of Funding Availability for CDBG funds. Applications will be due back about 3 to 4 weeks after that. And then we will have a committee that reviews these applications and helps us to make funding decisions for allocation and award. And so we typically like to have 1 to 2 housing commissioners on that committee. It involves reading maybe 3 to 6 applications, depending on what comes in, and then meeting for about an hour to 2 hours just to discuss scores and see if we can find cohesion as a group as to what kind of allocations we'd like to make. So if you might be up for volunteering for that, please let me know. And I just really appreciate you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christine. Adriana had her hand up, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Good afternoon, housing commissioners. I have an update on the 10-year housing plan. We have good news. We just completed another strategy, Create 4.7, which requires staff to continue to evaluate and amend the current accessory dwelling unit zoning code standards with the goal of increasing supply. This is completed through a zoning code amendment made to comply with HB 2720, but also as a collaborative ADU standard plan, library led by the Sustainability Division was finalized just last week. So we are now up to 13 strategies completed. The other update that I have is another bill, a Senate bill from 2024, Senate Bill 1162, began requiring certain municipalities to submit data to the Arizona Department of Housing for a housing needs assessment. This data requires projections for population growth, workforce, and employment demand. The Housing Division, in collaboration with the Planning and Development Services Division, submitted this data in December. So that can be viewed now on our 10-year housing plan webpage, and I'll be sure to share that link with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. Next up is Sullivan.
Hi, folks. I got a couple items for y'all today. The first one is the rental incentive bond program has a notice of funding availability out right now. We'll be looking for 1 or 2 of you commissioners to be on the scoring committee for that. Exact date still being worked out, but it would be after it closes on February 9th. That's when all the applications are due. Probably in the next couple weeks there after that. So I'll be sending out an email shortly to all of you. And if anybody's interested in being on that scoring committee, please let me know. I'll add you to the list. And then the other item, we have been working on an RFP for 3500 North Fort Valley Road. Sometimes I think it's called like the Sunflower Parcel. It's about 3 acres. That is now with procurement. We worked pretty closely with the real estate department to put together that RFP, and that should be getting posted here soonish. Exact date still coming, but soonish. But yeah, we left it pretty open-ended to try and really get some creative ideas flowing and some interesting proposals coming through for what to do with that space. But that's cool. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sullivan. Next, we have Jennifer.
Thanks. I'm just gonna stick to my update, just gonna focus on the adaptive reuse bond program. It's just come on really quickly, and we've had a lot of applications and funding is going really quickly. So it's a pretty good update. We had the adaptive reuse program was adopted by council last September, and then we've had 2 applicants for funding very quickly after that, within a couple weeks of council approval. Council approved loan documents for roughly $1 million each for 2 different loans. Those approvals were in November and December, and we were able to close on a loan for Flagstaff Shelter Services project. It's escaping me. The lantern, not the crown. It was a $1.1 million loan for the lantern. We closed on that loan on New Year's Eve. So that was a really exciting. That was technically the first that's like the first program funding to have been closed on. We're in the works to close on the second loan for I think it was $1.14 million for the Western Hills project. We don't have a date on that yet, but it's coming. And actually just last week, we received an application for basically the remainder of the funding. So I'm just going through that application right now, verifying it's eligible. So we may have loans for that upcoming project going to council in the next couple months. So I'm just excited that it took off so well, and we might have all that $3 million spent by the spring. So that's my update.
Wow, thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have Aiden.
All right. Hi, commissioners. I just wanted to give an update on the city website. Sully and I finalized the housing bond webpage, so it now includes a expenditure tracker showing the Proposition 442 allocations as well as the program spending. It is updated quarterly, and it has also 4 new subpages underneath it with RAD, CHAP, the rental incentive bond program, and the adaptive reuse bond program, showing the awards issued to date and the status of those. We're also working on transforming these pages and the 10-year housing plan webpage into a Connect Flagstaff project page. So it allows for easier public tracking on both the progress on the 10-year housing plan strategies and bond spending. And we'll keep you updated on those pages once they're available. And it looks like Adriana popped in the housing bond link, so you guys can take a look at that whenever you can. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aiden. And we have Marissa.
All right, thank you. Hi, all. Marissa Malloy, housing specialist. First up, last year Fannie Mae informed us that our current deed restriction is not in compliance. So while homes being sold under our current deed restriction can still receive lending from Fannie Mae, they don't benefit from that quick turnaround and automatic approval that a deed restriction approved by their program would. We've been spending the last few months reviewing and editing the recommended deed restriction from Grounded Solutions to fit our programs, and we're in the final stretch in reviewing the program with legal for approval. Additionally, it's budget season for us right now, so we're busy entering in next year's budget requests. And lastly, we had 4 families purchase their home with CHAP in December, utilizing $164,000 in down payment assistance funds. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa. Adriana, could we get the request for commissioners to participate in those reviews from Christine and Sullivan in an email so that it's easier for people to respond?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. We were going to follow up with an email so that commissioners can easily reach out to both Sully and Christine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. I will open the floor once more for any additional information or updates from anyone. Going once, going twice. All right, I will adjourn the meeting at 2:34 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.